Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman, here as always with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Well, Tony, it is Michigan Monday, but unfortunately, Michigan didn't play last weekend. So we thought, okay, well, we'll just do a rewatch game previewing Ohio State's next opponent, which is Indiana. So Indiana also didn't play last weekend. So we're going to go back to Indiana's previous game, which is when Indiana played Michigan. So, Tony, it's Michigan Monday, despite our best efforts.
Twice removed, or once removed. I'm not sure. Everybody in the Big Ten's related a little bit. Let's be honest. Tom,
Not the same with the SEC, but similar.
Let's just move on. Hello, everybody. No, I'm not going to do that again. While I was watching this and watching Indiana face Michigan's offense, I'm thinking maybe we should have picked a different game, like against an offense with some sort of, I don't know, pulse, something where they do something and force Indiana into situations. And it's like, well, is that Washington? Is that Nebraska? I mean, Northwestern scored 24 points against them, and we know it's not Northwestern. So we just figured, you know what? This was the first time they were close to losing. It's the first time they won in a single score manner. Time I went back and looked. So they've had all 9 of their wins prior to the Michigan game were double digits. And it's the most in school history. 9 victories by double digits is one more than they had in 1988, which is, their greatest year ever. But if you just look at the FBS wins by double figures, they haven't had any other than the 8 this year. They hadn't had any since 2020. And they had 4 that year. They had 4 in 2019. And this is so far out of the realm of normalcy for the Hoosiers that Curt Cignetti got a new contract extension and a bump in pay and more commitment from the Indiana powers that be that they will continue to fund the program the way it needs to be funded. So, Tom, let's talk about this Michigan game once again. And you can go back a couple weeks to our last Michigan Monday talking about this one. But I will start out by I was actually looking at my Michigan Monday notes. I will start out by saying this. This is something that I had heard talked about beforehand in many other games, but these guys throw the back shoulder like very, very well. And it's part of their offense. They'd rather do back shoulder than front shoulder. And when you're facing some of the defensive backs that they are, especially this week where the coverage may be there, should be there, but they do this by design. They'll throw some back shoulder stuff, and generally their receivers catch it. Elijah Surratt dropped one inside the 5 last against Michigan that would have led to possibly a touchdown, and so they missed some opportunities there. But Curtis Work, the quarterback, throws a very good ball on those routes, and they're really hard to defend. And I know we've seen Ohio State's coverage be susceptible at times, but also we've seen them have some dynamite coverage, and then also the receivers still make the catches. And that's one of the reasons people throw the back shoulders, because it's darn near impossible to defend. And so Indiana has made that part of their offense, and it's very, very effective.
Yeah, it is very, very effective. And if you can throw it well, it becomes close to undefendable. Not undefendable, but you've got to have really tight coverage. You've also got to get your head around. And in order to really defend it, you've got to play very aggressively. And, Ohio State has corners who can do all of those things, but it's almost impossible to do those things consistently. So that's going to be a thing that's going to be probably the biggest challenge for Ohio State defensively, because I have real questions about how well Indiana's going to be able to run the ball against the Buckeyes. So I think if they're going to have to make a lot of their hay through the air and being able to get the ball downfield, you're going to have to pass pro, but you've got, you can throw shorter back shoulder. You can throw that anywhere. That's a nice thing. You can throw a 5-yard back shoulder if you want to. So that makes that such a really, really effective weapon. And then the question is, does Ohio State get more aggressive with their corners? Are they going to play more press? I'm expecting a lot of man from Ohio State because that's the way you combat the RPO is you play a lot of man. You're going to play a lot of press. So then you really just have to execute really, really well to combat that back shoulder. Because if you're in a zone, early you need to make the back shoulder throw. That it doesn't work as well against zone. It really works against man. And that's going to be kind of the key is if Ohio State's in zone, then Indiana can really, on the RPOs. If Ohio State's in man, they're going to have to hit those back shoulder throws. And as you said, they throw it really well, but they don't always execute it. Elijah Surratt, you brought up the one that I was going to bring up, which is on that last drive with like 2.5 minutes left. They throw one down there and it was inside the 5. And if he makes that play, he got his hands on it, he had it, and he just didn't complete the catch going to the ground. If he makes that play, Indiana has the ball inside the 5 with 2:30 left, and you're either going to be able to punch it in to make it a 2-score game or, essentially run the clock out more or less. But he didn't complete the catch. That's the kind of little stuff that they can't have those. You can't have those drops against Ohio State this week. Let's jump over right now. I have a lot on the offense, but I do want to jump over real quick to talk about the Indiana defense a little bit because they are number 1 in the Big Ten in sacks, 31 sacks. Tony, do you know who's number 2 in the Big Ten in defense, in Big Ten in sacks this year?
I believe it is the Ohio State Buckeyes.
It is the Ohio State Buckeyes. Do you know how many sacks behind Indiana the Ohio State Buckeyes are?
I'll say third one.
They are, in fact, third one behind. They have 30 sacks, which I'm sure is what you meant. They have 30, and they're one behind. Indiana has 31, which is also third one, which is a little confusing, but that's okay. They are one behind. Yeah, so it's funny that Indiana is, you look at them and you're like, boy, they're 10th in the nation in sacks, 31. How many Ohio State fans have you heard talking about, they can't get to the quarterback, they're not getting any pressure this year, they're terrible. And Ohio State is 13th in the nation and second in the Big Ten in sacks with 30 sacks. But when you go through the list, the individual players on that list, Mikhail Kamara is number 1 on that list for Indiana. He is by far and away the leading sacker on that team, 9.5 sacks. He is also, Tony, he's got the Teron Vincent thing working for him where he's a defensive lineman wearing number 6, which always looks awesome. But he is a transfer from James Madison, came over from James Madison the same time that Kurt Cignetti did. James Carpenter, next on the team, 2.5 sacks, defensive tackle. Tony, 4 sacks for James Carpenter. You'll never believe it. He's a transfer from James Madison. Next up is Tyreek Tucker, 2.5 sacks, third on the team. He is a transfer, defensive tackle from James Madison. Tony, the leading tackler on the team, Aiden Fisher, 98 tackles for Aiden Fisher this year. He's a linebacker. Tony, guess where he played last year?
I know it was not Indiana. It was either James Madison or James Madison.
It was, yes. It was James Madison, yes. Jalen Walker, second highest tackler on the team with 59. Aiden Fisher, 98. Jalen Walker, 59. Tony, guess where Jalen Walker played his football last year?
Was it ODU?
No, it was James Madison. Tony, hold that thought for 1 minute. Third highest tackler on the team. Sean Asbury, where did he play last year? Defensive back.
That was ODU because 4 of their top 5 tacklers are from our transfers. And not to cut you off, Tom, but 7 of their 22 starters against Michigan played at Indiana last year. Everybody else played elsewhere.
Yep. Yeah, and the fourth, I was just going one more, fourth highest tackler on the team, D'Angelo Pons, defensive back, transfer for James Madison. That's the thing. Like, this is not a team that's loaded with 5-star talent. This is not the most talented team that Ohio State's going to face. But you've seen this. This is like one of these little life hacks in the transfer portal era. I think back to, I think it was Incarnate Word and Western Kentucky, where they basically imported the entire Incarnate Word offense and offensive coaching staff one year, and all of a sudden Western Kentucky was absolutely slinging it all over the field. Indiana's kind of done that with defense here. It's not the most physically talented, 5-star laden defense you'll ever seen, but it is a veteran defense that has been playing in this defensive system and playing together in a lot of cases for multiple years. It is a very, very well-coached, very talented defense. And I think maybe think of them as like transfer portal Iowa defense, where it's not, it's not like the most exciting defense, or, it's not, oh boy, on National Signing Day, everyone is all hyped about this defense. But on the field, they're pretty good. They are really, really good at limiting opposing offenses on the ground. They have gotten to the quarterback more than anyone else in the Big Ten. I think that's just one of those things. I think if people have not watched a lot of Indiana this year, probably don't really understand the amount that they brought in through the portal and why that has been so effective.
Yeah, 27 transfers and 13 of them from James Madison. And they had a couple from Old Dominion, Michigan State, Austin Peay, North Carolina. They brought receivers in from around the country, got Miles Cross from Ohio, Keyshawn Williams from Wake Forest. All of these guys make plays. Elijah Surratt, we already talked about. Miles Price from Texas Tech. The running backs were transfers, and they're all experienced. They got all MAC defensive lineman CJ West. So they went and got veterans and talented veterans who now have played together. And Curt Cignetti on his Monday press conference credited the guys and the coaches that they brought over. He said the guys and the coaches, those are his words, have won 23 of their last 24 games. So pressure is not something they're unfamiliar with. Big games are not something they're unfamiliar with. Winning isn't something they're unfamiliar with. But it's not just, there are 14 other transfers in there that are not from James Madison, but the James Madison crew has kind of rebuilt that culture and set the tone offensively and defensively. And then you can bring in Curtis Rourke at quarterback to do the same from the top down with that offense. Their offensive line is a mix of transfers and guys that were at Indiana. And so they've just he's done a really, really good job of melding everybody together, which is not easy when you look up and down that starting lineup. And like I said, 70% of them on both sides of the ball are from other schools. And yet you don't hear about any locker room problems. I mean, if you've been at Indiana for 3 years now, and it's like, yeah, we won 3 games last year. It was pretty cool. And now you've won as many games as you have all season long. If you're not happy about that, then you're not really contributing to the culture in the program anyway. So Curt Cignetti's probably like, you can just go hang out in the corner if you want. We're here about winning. You can help us win, or you can watch us win. And which would you rather do? So they're doing a really, really good job of that. Let me see here. Here's one for you, Tom. And about that defense, I'll just say this. They do multiple things, but they're mainly a four down. You'll see some 3 down, but also kind of a 3-4 look with two edge guys along with them. I was surprised at how far off the corners were in this game. They were 10 yards off the line of scrimmage, 10 yards off of the receivers. I don't know what to expect with this week, because they're defending 2 very different offenses, Ohio State and Michigan. They're not going to be mistaken for each other, certainly walking down the street. And so will those corners be up more, or will they stay back 10 yards and kind of freely give up just a 6-yard hitch? And will Ohio State stay patient enough to take those? Because I assume if they do stay back, they would prefer that Ohio State just keep doing that until you lose some patience and you take some shots that maybe you wouldn't, because we don't think you have the patience. But Ryan Day, the patience that Chip Kelly has is something that he has talked about this season, where Ryan Day has not had that same kind of patience as a play caller. And Chip Kelly has been able to just keep him consistent, run the ball, throw it, and you don't need to go deep and go deep and go deep. Now, it's something that Ohio State has been working on and getting better at. With those corners playing so often, if the safeties are back, I don't know how many deep shots we'll see this weekend. But again, the way if the back 7, the back 4 at least, if the safeties are back and the corners are back, I'm expecting Ohio State to run the ball based on what I saw in this one.
Yeah, and I think this goes to your point earlier about I don't know how much you can really take from this game in terms of Indiana defending Michigan, in terms of what Indiana is going to do against Ohio State, because you make a list of all the things that Michigan can't do on offense, and it's a lot of the things that Ohio State can do and can do very effectively on offense. And I don't think offensive coordinator is the only place between those two teams that Ohio State has a significant advantage in terms of the Ohio State offense versus the Michigan offense. But when you're looking at Michigan, I think you can play off, because I think people would wonder, why would you bother playing off? It's not like Michigan's going to be torching you deep. You can just stay back, play kind of conservatively in the secondary, keep your linebackers up and try and attack the run, and make Michigan try and be methodical and consistently execute going down the field. Guess what? Davis Warren can't do that. Alex Orji can't do that. They can't hit 6 passes in a row. You see passes sailing over receivers. You see stuff getting, bounce passes. You see all sorts of gross stuff. I don't think you can defend Ohio State that way. I think they're going to have to make a little more of a decision. And they have been very effective against the run this year. They are second in the nation, 2.46 yards per rush allowed. Tony, want to guess how much behind that Ohio State is? Indiana second in the nation. Where's Ohio State?
Ohio State is 7th.
Third, Tony. Third in the nation. 2.46 yards per rush allowed by Indiana, 2.79 for Ohio State. Indiana in yards per pass allowed, 5.8. They are 7th nationally. Ohio State, 6.1. They are 20th nationally. And, I think you have to do a little bit of an opponent adjustment there, because Indiana has not played Oregon. Indiana has not played Penn State. So Ohio State's played some better teams than Indiana has. But the Hoosiers have been very, very effective at limiting teams. I think there's also going to be a little bit of an adjustment, because Michigan is by far the most talented team that Indiana has played. Maybe not on offense, but overall in terms of just star talent, Michigan is the best team that Indiana has played. I think there's going to be a little bit of an adjustment for the Buckeyes, facing the Buckeyes in terms of these are going to be the 2 best running backs you face all year. These are going to be the 3 best wide receivers you face all year. This is going to be the best quarterback you face all year, at least until, if Indiana wins, maybe you can have a conversation about some of those in terms of playing Oregon, or, if they make the college football playoff, you're probably running into at least someone that has a conversation there, but there's really no conversation right now. This is going to be a very, very talented Ohio State team that Indiana is going to have to figure out. I think they have to try and stop the run first. I think that's because if Ohio State can run the ball against Indiana, I think Indiana is in trouble. And even if it's 4 yards a carry, I think Indiana is probably in some trouble defensively, because Indiana, I think you look at their defense, first in the nation, first in the Big Ten in sacks, as I said before. To me, Tony, I look at Indiana and they got some pressure on Michigan. They derailed Michigan's first drive when they were deep in Indiana territory, got to Davis Warren, knocked the ball loose, turned into a kind of a scramble and led to a field goal attempt instead of a touchdown. They got some pressure off the edges there against Michigan. Now, Michigan's tackles are not very good, but I think a lot of this is going to come down to, can Ohio State run the ball at least decently, and can Ohio State protect Will Howard? Because if they can, I think Ohio State gets to 28, 30-something points and probably wins the game.
Yeah, and if Indiana can get to Will Howard they get a free possession and turn the ball over on, whether a fumble or something like that, and gain a possession. The Indiana rush defense, the season high that they've given up this year was 137 yards to Charlotte and a 52-14 win. So I'm just going to assume like 50 of those yards came in the fourth quarter against backups. But they've given up over 100 yards just 3 times this year, 112 yards against Maryland, 116 against Washington. So they've been able to shut people down. When you talk about the talent that Ohio State has, it's going to be waves all game long, offensively and defensively. And I think we saw those waves impact the Hoosiers against Michigan, because it was great early on for Indiana, and then it stopped being great. They were, in this game, they were like 3, let me just bring up the third downs for the game. Sorry. They were 4 of 11 in this game. Okay. 3 of those were 3rd and 1s. They picked up 1 third down that was beyond a 3rd and 1. It was a 3rd and 8. They gained 9 yards. Anything outside of 3rd and 1 and that one singular 3rd and 8, they were not converting on 3rd downs. Michigan was creating pressure. Michigan was bringing extra people when they needed to. They were bringing some simulated pressure. So they were doing some things to really impact the Indiana offense. So Curtis Rourke in the first half of this game, 14 of 18 for 190 yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Very, very good. Was getting the ball off, was accurate, was finding the right guy on the blitzes. Second half, 3 of 10 for 16 yards and an interception, and that interception came inside their own 10-yard line. And so, which is the real Curtis Rourke? It's somewhere in there. But when I see what happened, I see that, one, he did throw some dangerous passes in this one, and not just the interception. Two, the defensive linemen are going to have to get their hands up on the quick RPOs and just the regular quick passes, because that can create an interception. Michigan had an opportunity. I think Kenneth Grant popped one up and nobody was there to catch it, but that could have been a possession. So I think you can get to him, and Michigan was able to get to him with 4 as well. And Ohio State can do that, but they're bringing more. So, and they're becoming more and more effective with their blitzing, as I'm sure you and Ross Fulton are talking about quite a bit on the morning show of late. So I think that you can impact Curtis Rourke. It's just a matter of, okay, now that you've impacted him, what happens next? Because he can make some plays and he can get free. The receivers can run some scramble drills. So the timing is going to be thrown off quite a bit, I think, in this one. It's just what happens after that will determine whether this is a 17-point win or a 4-quarter, claw your eyes out kind of game.
Well, and one thing that's going to make you claw your eyes out is if Indiana can't run the ball, it is going to be a claw your eyes out kind of game, I think, for Indiana, because they only had 1.4 yards per carry against Michigan. It was 28 rushes for 40 yards. And some of that sacks, but they just never got going on the ground, which then you get one-dimensional. And Curtis Rourke is not, he can run. And I realize I'm saying this after saying, well, Dylan Raiola doesn't really run, and then Dylan Raiola runs for 40 yards. And Drew Aller doesn't really run, but then Drew Aller runs for a bunch of yards against Ohio State. But Curtis Rourke doesn't really run. His long run this season is 12 yards. He's not, he's much more of a pocket passer quarterback rather than a dual threat kind of guy. I think there's going to be concerns for Indiana in terms of how well they can run the ball. And if they can't run the ball, then you've really got to be pretty perfect in the passing game. And you also, if you can't run the ball and you get real predictable and one-dimensional, that sets you up to have a not very good time in pass pro. As you mentioned, Michigan got home a bunch in the second half. Sometimes it was just 5-man pressures. Sometimes it was just 4-man pressures. But it was if you got into 3rd and long and it was a predictable passing situation, the Indiana offensive line did have some concerns. Now, Michigan's defensive line is very good. I think we can have Michigan's defensive line is as good as Ohio State's conversation, and they're at least in spitting distance, if one way or another. So Ohio State, you've seen them get pressure against not very good offensive lines, and I don't know that Indiana's is great, but it feels like they should be able to get pressure. If Indiana can't run the ball against Ohio State, if Ohio State outrushes them, even if it's 4 and some change to under 2 yards or 4 and some change to 2 yards per carry, if you just tell me that, I tell you Ohio State probably wins by 7 to 10 to 14 points, something like that. I think Indiana's going to have to find a way to move the ball on the ground somehow. I really have questions about how well they're going to do that. I was kind of watching this game and thinking that, and then I thought, okay, I'm going to sanity check myself on this. And I pulled up the College Football Nerds prediction model thing. And what they do is they do an opponent adjusted per play thing and tell you basically, okay, based on how Indiana runs the ball and based on how Ohio State defends the run and adjusted for opponent and adjusted for situation and all that kind of stuff, what kind of an advantage does Ohio State have? Ohio State should be what % better than the typical defense against Indiana running the ball. And it came up as 34% better than the average defense against Indiana in terms of limiting Indiana's run game. That's a monster number. That is a big number. Just to put it in perspective, the Ohio State offense, a 6% advantage running the ball, a 15% advantage passing the ball, and Indiana a 10% advantage passing the ball against the Ohio State defense. So Indiana has a little bit of an advantage in passing the ball. Ohio State has a huge advantage against the rushing attack in their model, but I think that broadly lines up with what I would sort of expect based on what we saw against Michigan, what we've seen from Indiana overall. They're, I think, a team where if it's really rolling, it's really rolling. They have a very, very good time. Or if you can bottle up that run game and you can start getting some pressure on Rourke, if it looks like the second half against Michigan, it was like they didn't know what to do. They had no answers in that second half of that game for most of that game. And, Michigan's got a good defense, but there was no Will Johnson out there. Mm-hmm. So this was not the, A1 Michigan defense, and they really shut down Indiana in the second half. The first half, Indiana going right up and down the field, and everyone's having a great time and everyone's cheering and waving their towels. In the second half, it was like, oh boy, they can't do anything right now.
And if Michigan had any kind of offense, they're going to win that game. And they'd certainly force Indiana to do more than they did, which may have caused more issues. So Indiana knows that they're going to have to score in this one. It is going to be quite the contrast from last week for Ohio State. Indiana's going to run tempo. They're going to be aggressive on offense, and they're going to be aggressive on defense. So this is going to be a 180 from what the Ohio State defense experienced last week. So they're going to have to get lined up and ready to go. And one of the things that Indiana does really, really well is they block on screens like nobody's business. And they'll call it at any point, and whether it's a tight end screen, whether it's in the backfield, whether it's a wide receiver screen, everybody's blocking, everybody's fighting. And it's also indicative of that veteran scrappiness from all of these smaller school guys coming up here, and now they're doing this, and they wouldn't have gotten where they are without the ability to be fighters. And now they've come up to a level, and they're playing really well. They execute really well on their screens, and they're effective in picking up necessary yardage. So that's something that Ohio State is going to have to, as that defensive line is getting after it, they're going to have some free runs that they're going to have to recognize immediately that those are screens and retrace their steps, as they say, because they're going to throw it whatever, and they do it effectively, and then they have guys waiting to block you and knock you out. And so that's something that the Ohio State defense is going to have to be concerned about, and they'll kill you with like 3rd and longs on that, and it's demoralizing when they pick up a 3rd and 8 when you're getting so close to getting Curtis Rourke, and it's like all a ruse because it's a screen. So they have this way of building their own confidence while knocking yours down, and this is a team that's going to come into this game really, really confident, and you've got the crowd has an opportunity to impact this game, and the defense has an opportunity to do the same. And I will say defensively for Indiana, they've only allowed 2 opening scores on opening drives this season, but it's been the last 2 games, both Michigan State and Michigan kicked field goals. So maybe the defense is getting tired. Although Curt Cignetti did say on Monday, last week was the perfect week for a bye week because they've gotten healthy. They've rested, and he said, we'll come into this game completely healthy, which is a lie, but healthier than they would have otherwise.
Yeah, I pulled up an article just to check on the status of a couple guys who got knocked out during the Michigan game, not like knocked unconscious, but knocked out of the game. Justice Ellison, a running back, and Miles Price, the wide receiver who transferred with Rourke from Ohio University. Both of those guys had got really drilled during that game, left the game there. Supposedly were both practicing last week, so should be good to go. The point about the crowd is interesting because you go through Indiana's schedule and there's lots of conversation about, boy, they haven't played anyone that's any good. Here's a list of their road games. At UCLA, which is not exactly history's most loudest or most intimidating venues, at Northwestern in the little lakefront stadium, not even Wrigley Field, and at Michigan State in East Lansing. So we have been to 2 of those venues this year. Well, we've been to Northwestern. That was not, I'm sure there were more than, there might have been the same number of Northwestern fans there for the game at the lakefront stadium, maybe even a few more. But Michigan State is the most intimidating place that they've played so far this year. Could be a little bit of a jump to Columbus, Ohio, and 103,000 folks in the stadium. And while you look at the James Madison guys and you look at the Ohio University guys and all the guys who've transferred in, those teams won a lot of football games. They did not play in front of 100,000 people, probably ever. Maybe James Madison played someone non-conference last year that I'm not thinking of, but this is going to be by far the biggest in terms of impact nationally and in terms of determining what their season's like, and also biggest in terms of just size of venue, volume of crowd. The fact that it's a noon game probably helps a little bit, but there's going to be a lot. This is one that if Indiana gets going, it can snowball in a positive way. If Indiana falls behind and they get one and they can't run the ball, if Ohio State's up 10, 14 points and Indiana can't run the ball, this could snowball on the Hoosiers. It could. I don't think it's going to. Indiana's been pretty effective at just being able to kind of methodically keep scoring and keep even if it's just threes, keep that number on your side of the scoreboard, keep that ticking up and stay in the game. And if it becomes a fourth quarter game, then maybe that swings back and everyone gets a little nervous, and then the atmosphere in the stadium is not a benefit to Ohio State. But there's a bunch of ifs and buts in that sentence. I did want to talk. We talked about the Ohio transfers, Miles Price. Mm-hmm. He is, much like the James Madison guys on defense. Miles Price was a wide receiver for Ohio University. He is now a wide receiver. Came over with Curtis Rourke from Ohio. There's a little bit of a connection there. Their wide receiver unit is not bad. There's obviously not a Jeremiah Smith there. Omar Cooper, really solid receiver, had a touchdown catch, then had another long catch and run against Michigan. And that's not a bad Michigan secondary, even without Will Johnson. Elijah Surratt, he's their leading receiver. We mentioned the drop earlier, but he had like just a little stutter and go. But man, he had a stutter and go on Jair Hill and just got wide open. He was 10 yards open on that one. And, Zach Horton, their tight end, is someone who is, you look up his stats and he looks like he's going to be the guy who gets the one annoying first down where he'll have one catch for 9 yards, but it will be on a 3rd and 8 kind of thing. Like, just be prepared for that to be a little bit of a factor. And Miles Price, he's held like 300 yards receiving. He has not been a big play guy, but just another guy to kind of keep an eye on there. The other thing that I wanted to touch on real quick is Ohio State has had their offensive line sort of reshuffled because of an injury. Indiana lost one of their starting guards, Drew Evans, during practice. Sounds like an Achilles injury. Before the Michigan game, Tyler Stevens in there for him now, but they are not, Indiana does not have the roster depth that Ohio State has. And Ohio State is, I think things are going better than you probably would have expected, given the shuffling that Ohio State has had to do on the offensive line. But in a game where can they run the ball, can they protect the quarterback is, kind of two of the big burning questions for Indiana. A new starter in the offensive line is not probably tremendously great news.
Those receivers, they're Elijah Surratt has 38 catches. He leads the team. Then they have 4 wide receivers, not tight ends and running backs, 4 wide receivers between 24 and 30 receptions. So you got a guy with 24, a guy with 25, a guy with 27, and a guy with 30. So any of those 5 guys can be the guy in a particular game that goes off. So that's always going to be a concern, and you can have no let up, and they can look for matchups and try to build matchups where they can. So all of those guys are dangerous in their own way. And then the last thing for me, Tom, is the attendance. You were wondering, have any of those James Madison guys played in a big place last year? Yes, they were at Virginia. So a crowd of over 56,000 saw that game, in-state rivalry there. So very, very, very raucous. And of course, the biggest crowd they saw this year at Michigan State, 68,423. The Northwestern attendance, 12,023. The UCLA attendance, 47,811. So this is going to be a very, very different environment. And to the fans who aren't thrilled with a 12 p.m. kick, I understand. However, this past weekend, we just watched a bunch of Ohio State fans pack bars from 7 a.m. until about 10:45 a.m. and then run across the street and get into the stadium. And we're a part of it. And I didn't hear anybody complaining that this was too early to start drinking or whatever. And so they dealt with it and they operated and they were excited to be there. This is the biggest game in Ohio Stadium to this point this year. It shouldn't matter what time it is, what time it kicks off. And it's a very big game. You should want to be there and you should want to be as loud as you possibly can because you have the opportunity to impact this game, so you should take it seriously.
Well, and this is a game where I think the fact that this is being played now at this point of the season, as opposed to if this was the first weekend of October, I expect this to be a game where Ohio State fans, just, the fan base on the whole, but also the team and everyone takes this more seriously than they probably would have, in early October. Because October 5th or whatever weekend you want to say, it's easy to have a team that doesn't play anyone out of conference. Oh, well, they're 4-0. You got to take them seriously. And everyone always says, oh, you got to take them seriously. And it's like, I can read the point spread. I understand that, yes, they're 4-0, but their best win is against a team that's going to finish fourth in the Ohio Valley Conference. So really, this is a game where this is the third top 5 matchup of the season for Ohio State. They had to go on the road to Oregon. They had to go on the road to Penn State. Third top 5 matchup in Ohio State for Ohio State this season. I saw something that I have not fact checked this one, but I believe that this is accurate. The first top 5 matchup in Indiana program history. So, this is the biggest game in Indiana football history, probably in terms of regular season games. This is a chance, and this is a very big game for Ohio State as well. You've got game day coming. You've got big noon kickoff coming. That at this point is almost, it feels like, oh, one of the big national pregame shows is coming to Ohio State. Wow. What does that make it? Saturday. Like that's been almost every week this year, but it's still, sort of a reiteration of the fact that, yes, this is a really big game. Everyone has figured that out. I think the fact that Ohio State fans have had time to watch Indiana continue to roll up wins, watch Indiana get their name called closer to the top of the AP rankings and the coaches rankings and the college football playoff rankings than you ever would have expected before. I would assume that you probably don't need to have this is an important game conversation with people, but as it turns out, Tony, this is going to be a pretty consequential game for both of these programs.
Talk to your kids about top 5 Indiana. That's all. That's what we'll say. So we're all looking forward to it, and you should be as well. And I know you are. And enjoy it. There's two games left in Ohio Stadium, 2 regular season games left. Who knows what lays beyond that, but we're all looking forward to it. So thank you all for tuning in. Hit that thumbs up before you go if you're watching this on YouTube. And of course, 5-star rating and review is always welcome on your podcast platform of choice. And you can find us at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Sign up. First month, just $4.99. Become a member there. It is the absolute best way to support what we do. So thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.